You failed. Again. I know what you did. This can't be real. This can't be real. The classroom buzzed faintly with the sound of papers shuffling. But Amara didn't hear any of it. She stared at her test. A red F. Stamped so boldly, it looked personal. Her chest tightened. Her hands began to sweat. No, this had to be a mistake. She had memorized every chapter. Practiced every equation. She even helped 2 other classmates pass. So how? There must be a mix-up, she whispered to herself, flipping through the pages. Each answer, carefully written. Correct. Neat. Complete. This is wrong, she muttered, louder now. Across the room, eyes were already turning toward her. She failed again, someone whispered. Didn't her dad brag she was scholarship material? Another smirked. Ms. Hargrove stood at the whiteboard, arms folded. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. Problem, Amara? She asked, her tone tight and laced with fake concern. Amara stood up slowly, the test paper trembling in her hand. This isn't the grade I earned, she said, voice steady, but barely. Well, Miss Hargrove said, stepping forward with a cool smile. Sometimes, what we think we deserve doesn't match reality. The entire room went silent. Amara's jaw clenched. Something was off. This wasn't about a wrong answer. This was about her. And the way Miss Hargrove looked at her. It wasn't about education. It was about control. I want my paper reviewed, Amara said firmly. The teacher blinked, just for a second, before her smirk returned. Of course. But don't expect miracles, dear. That word, dear, burned more than the grade. Amara sat down. Eyes around the room were still locked on her. But hers were locked on the door. Because she had already sent the test copy to someone. Someone who didn't take injustice lightly. He knows. The school hallway was packed. Lockers slammed. Laughter echoed. But Amara didn't hear any of it. She walked fast, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had already sent a picture of her test paper the night before it was returned. To someone who trusted her. Someone who wouldn't stay silent. She opened her messages. Dad. I saw the paper. You were right. She changed the marks. Amara stopped walking. Her heart pounded louder than the hallway noise. Then another message appeared. Dad. I'm calling the board. I'm coming in. Amara swallowed hard. She wasn't scared. She was ready. But something in her gut still twisted. Because this wasn't just about one grade anymore. Back in the classroom, Ms. Hargrove watched from the window as Amara walked by. She leaned closer to the glass, narrowing her eyes. She sensed something. Let's see how far you're willing to push this, she muttered. But she didn't know. Amara wasn't the one pushing anymore. She's always been a problem. Inside the teacher's lounge, Miss Hargrove stood by the coffee machine, stirring her drink a little too calmly. Another teacher, Mr. Daniels, looked up from the table. Heard there was drama in your class. She chuckled dryly. Oh, it's Amara. Again. Always acting like the world's against her. Mr. Daniels raised a brow. She's one of the brightest kids here. Ms. Hargrove shrugged. Bright doesn't mean disciplined. She needs to learn where she fits. He didn't reply. Just stared. And then she added quietly, too quietly. Some of them come in thinking they're owed something. Daniels flinched. But she didn't care. She sipped her coffee and whispered. Let her complain. No one's going to believe her over me. But down the hall, a janitor who had paused outside the door slowly picked up his mop again. He had heard every word. And he wasn't just any janitor. He's already here. Amara sat quietly in the school library, her back straight, phone buzzing in her lap. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had just read her dad's final message. I'm outside. Don't say anything else to her. I've brought someone. She looked up slowly. And across the library, through the glass, she saw the front entrance open. Two figures stepped in. One in a dark suit, tall, confident, her father. And next to him, a woman in a blazer holding a folder, sharp eyes, stern walk. Amara's stomach turned. The school board? She stood up, quietly gathered her things, and took one last look at the test paper inside her folder. Time to show them what you tried to bury, she whispered. As she stepped out into the hall, her father spotted her, gave her a small nod. She nodded back. No fear. Just fire. And Ms. Hargrove had no idea what was already walking down her hallway. The knock on the classroom door was sharp. Not rushed, intentional. Ms. Hargrove looked up mid-lecture, her marker pausing on the whiteboard. Come in, she called, smoothing her blouse. The door opened. And in stepped Amara's father, dressed in a crisp dark suit, flanked by a woman in heels, holding a board folder marked District Oversight. The room fell completely silent. Students turned. Phones slid quietly into pockets. Even the class clown didn't breathe. Ms. Hargrove, the woman said, professionally. We'd like a word. About a student. Amara Lewis. Ms. Hargrove's face twitched, only for a second, but enough to be noticed. Of course, she said, flashing a tight smile. We can talk during my free period. Actually, the board official replied, stepping inside. We'd prefer now. And then Amara walked in behind them. Calm. Silent. Eyes locked on her teacher. Ms. Hargrove's fingers clenched the marker tighter. She wasn't in control anymore. Let's review the test together. The door shut behind them. The board official laid a folder on Ms. Hargrove's desk. This is a copy of Amara Lewis's exam, the version she submitted. Ms. Hargrove forced a smile. I already graded that. She failed. Strange, the woman said, flipping it open. Because we had two other math teachers independently recheck it. Both gave it full marks. Ms. Hargrove's face drained of color. That's not possible. There must have been some confusion. The only confusion, Amara's dad cut in, stepping forward, is how every correct answer became wrong after you got your hands on it. Gasps filled the room. A few students whispered. Phones were recording now. Ms. Hargrove's voice cracked. You're accusing me of misconduct? We're not accusing, the board member said, coldly. We're investigating. Right now. Amara stood still, eyes locked on her teacher. For the first time. Ms. Hargrove looked genuinely scared. The truth starts leaking. Word spread like wildfire. Students outside the classroom whispered. Phones buzzed with texts. They're confronting her. Amara's dad is here, with the board. Inside, Ms. Hargrove tried to gather herself. This is outrageous. I've taught here for 15 years. You think I'd risk my career over one student? The board member didn't blink. One student, or one pattern? She opened another folder. We pulled grades from the last 4 semesters. There's a very clear trend. Ms. Hargrove's voice dropped to a whisper. This is a witch hunt. No, Amara's dad replied, stepping forward. This is a mirror. You just don't like what it's showing you. The room was dead silent. Then, one student, a quiet girl in the front row, slowly raised her hand. She failed me too. And I got every question right. Another student added. She changed my grade after I spoke up about something. The board official turned to Ms. Hargrove. Still think it's just about Amara? Ms. Hargrove's lips pressed together. Her eyes darted to the door, like she wanted to run. But it was far too late for that. The janitor steps in. Just as the board official began jotting notes, the classroom door creaked open again. Everyone turned. It was the janitor. Old uniform. Quiet steps. A familiar face no one paid much attention to until now. "Sorry to interrupt," he said calmly. "But I think I should speak." Ms. Hargrove's eyes widened. "Mr. Collins, please, this isn't your concern." But the board member raised her hand. "Actually, go on." The janitor stepped forward, clutching a small notebook. "I've worked this hallway for 11 years, he began. Cleaned after hours. Heard things I shouldn't ve. Never said a word. Until now." He opened the notebook. "Ms. Hargrove, I've heard you say things. About these students. About Amara. I wrote them down." The classroom went dead silent. Amara's heart pounded. Ms. Hargrove paled. "You called them quota kids. You said they'd never last here. You even laughed about failing them." He turned to the board official and held out the notebook. "I didn't know if it mattered. But now, I see that it does." And just like that, the final crack appeared in Ms. Hargrove's perfect image. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Caught in her own words. The board official flipped through the janitor's notebook. Each line was worse than the last. "Not smart enough. They're here to fill numbers, not pass. I decide who succeeds in this school." Ms. Hargrove's voice cracked. "That's taken out of context. He's lying." But the janitor didn't even flinch. He looked straight at her and said, "Then why did you laugh when you said it?" The classroom gasped. One student muttered, "I knew it." Another whispered, "She really said that?" The board official closed the notebook and turned to Ms. Hargrove. "We will need you to step outside with us. Now." "You have no proof," she snapped, trembling. Amara finally spoke, calm, steady. "Actually, I recorded your comment in class. You said I didn't belong here." She held up her phone. A few students nodded, they had heard it too. The weight of every lie, every twist, every cover-up crashed down on Ms. Hargrove in one quiet moment. And this time, she didn't have the words to fight back. Escorted out. Ms. Hargrove stood frozen. The board official didn't repeat herself. Two security staff appeared in the doorway, summoned quietly by the principal moments earlier. "Ma'am," one said firmly, "please come with us." Ms. Hargrove turned to her students, her eyes wild now, desperate. "This is a mistake. You all know me. I've given my life to this school." No one moved. No one defended her. Amara sat tall, her test paper in one hand, phone in the other, still recording. As the teacher stepped out, her heels echoing in a silence that felt like judgment, one student whispered, "Not a mistake. Just justice." In the hallway, as the doors closed behind her, Miss Hargrove looked back one last time. And met Amara's eyes. There was no anger in them. Only calm. The kind of calm that comes when truth finally wins. The apologies began. The door had barely clicked shut when the room exhaled, like it had been holding its breath for months. A few students turned to Amara. "We're sorry," one boy said quietly. "I believed her. I thought you were just complaining." Another girl nodded, guilt in her eyes. "I wanted to speak up last year. When she did the same to me. I was scared." Amara gave a small smile, but her eyes stayed sharp. "You don't have to apologize to me. Just don't stay quiet next time." The board official stepped forward again, voice firm but calm. "We'll be conducting a full review. If anyone else has experienced what Amara did, we want to hear it. Today." One by one, hands began to rise. Not just Amara. Not just this year. Ms. Hargrove's injustice had been an open wound. And now it was finally bleeding in the open. The list they didn't expect. By noon, the library had turned into a quiet storm of voices and truth. Students sat in small groups. Board officials listened, took notes, recorded statements. Amara sat with her father by the window, watching as more and more classmates came forward. And then, one teacher stepped in. Not Ms. Hargrove. Not one of her allies. But Mr. Daniels, the same man from the lounge. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to add something." The room stilled again. A year ago, I raised concerns about her grading patterns. I was told not to make noise. That she was protected. He handed over a file. I kept records. I hoped I'd never need to use them. The board member opened it, her eyebrows raised. It was worse than anyone expected. There were dozens of names. Grades changed. Comments made. Patterns that spanned years. And at the bottom of the list, in small, shaking handwriting, Amara Lewis, targeted. Repeatedly. The room went silent again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was power. Truth was no longer hiding. The board takes over. The district board official stood in front of the class now, not just as a visitor, but with full authority. Behind her, a second board member entered, handing her a sealed document. She opened it carefully, then looked up at the students, teachers, and Amara's father. Effective immediately, Ms. Hargrove is suspended pending a formal investigation. Gasps echoed again, even though most had seen it coming. This school has failed to act for far too long, she continued. So now, we're stepping in. She turned to the principal, who stood awkwardly near the door. You will provide us full access to all academic records, parent complaints, and internal staff reports for the last 5 years. The principal nodded quickly, too quickly. Amara leaned over to her dad and whispered, "They're not just cleaning out one teacher." He smiled faintly. "They're cleaning the whole house." The students, once silent, now looked around, not with fear, but with something new. Hope? The walls that once protected injustice were starting to crack wide open. She wasn't alone after all. As the room cleared out for lunch, Amara stayed behind. She sat quietly in her chair, flipping through her original test, the one that had been marked F. Now corrected, now validated. But more than the grade, it was what came next that mattered. Footsteps approached. She looked up to see the quiet girl from earlier, the one who had raised her hand first. "Hey," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, thank you." Amara blinked. For what? For not giving up. If you hadn't spoken up, I probably never would have. More students began trickling back in. A few gave her nods, small smiles. Some walked over, even sat near her. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was clear. She wasn't isolated anymore. And the label Ms. Hargrove tried to stamp on her, troublemaker, entitled, not good enough, was fading. Replaced with a new one. Leader. The emails that sparked a storm. Back in the administrative office, the board official sat behind a desk, reviewing a stack of printed emails. Her expression grew colder with every page. She was warned, she muttered. By parents. By students. Even by staff. Dozens of messages. Subject lines like, "Grade injustice, urgent. My daughter is being targeted." No response from the principal. Some were over a year old. All had gone ignored. The second board member, reviewing another batch, looked up. This isn't just about a teacher anymore. It's about a system that let her thrive. The first official nodded. We're launching a district-wide audit. Today. Meanwhile, Amara's dad sat in the lobby, phone to his ear. We're not stopping here, he said quietly. Every child deserves better than this. Upstairs, word spread fast. They're looking into every complaint now. This school's about to change. And at the center of it all, a black girl who refused to be silent. Media at the gate. By the next morning, the school gates didn't open to just students. News vans lined the sidewalk. Reporters held microphones, whispering into cameras. We're outside Millstone High, where a black student's accusations against a longtime teacher have triggered a full district investigation. Students whispered as they walked in. Is that the news? They're here for Amara, right? Inside the school, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Teachers stood quieter in the lounge. Eyes darted. Conversations stopped when doors opened. Amara walked through the main corridor with her dad beside her, calm, composed. Phones snapped pictures. Not because she was a troublemaker anymore, but because she had become the face of change. One reporter called out through the gate. Amara, do you feel vindicated today? She didn't turn. She didn't have to. Because change wasn't just coming. It was already here. Teachers start talking. Later that day, behind the staff room door, voices rose, not in anger, but guilt. I always thought something was off with Hargrove, one teacher admitted, sipping cold coffee. But I didn't want to get involved. She shut me down the moment I asked about a regrade, another added. Said I should focus on my own students. The school counselor stood near the corner, arms crossed. We failed them. And we failed Amara most of all. Silence fell. For the first time in years, the teachers weren't just talking about lesson plans and schedules. They were talking about accountability. Down the hall, Amara passed by, her presence quiet, steady. She didn't hear what they said. But she didn't need to. Because even in rooms she wasn't in, her courage was doing the talking. She walks differently now. Amara stepped into the cafeteria, tray in hand, the same way she had every school day. But today felt different. Not because the food had changed. Not because the room was quieter. But because of the way people looked at her. Not with pity. Not with judgment. With respect. With recognition. She walked past the table where she used to sit alone. Sat at a new one, and students followed. Even the ones who used to ignore her. Even the ones who once doubted her. A girl she barely knew leaned over. That was brave, what you did. Amara just smiled, humble but firm. It wasn't bravery, she said. It was necessary. Across the room, teachers watched quietly. And outside, the camera crews were still rolling. But Amara wasn't thinking about any of that. She was just, finally breathing. The assembly they didn't expect. The following morning, a surprise announcement came over the intercom. All students and faculty, please report to the auditorium immediately. Chatter buzzed through the halls. Is this about Amara again? Are they making a statement? The room filled quickly. On stage stood the school board officials, the principal, and Amara. Not in uniform. Not hiding. She wore a simple blazer. Confident. Still. The board official stepped to the mic. We're not here to protect reputations today. We're here to protect our students. She turned slightly, facing Amara. This student stood against a system. And because she did, that system is finally changing. There were no fireworks. No applause yet. Just a silence that meant everyone was listening. Amara stepped forward, holding a paper. I didn't do this to be praised. I did this because I was tired of being invisible. I speak not just for me, but for everyone who ever felt small, silenced, or shoved aside. Now the room clapped. Not loud at first, but rising. Real. They started listening. After the assembly, something strange happened. People didn't just go back to class. They stayed. Groups formed in hallways. Teachers talked to students, not at them, but with them. One teacher walked up to a black student who'd always sat at the back of the class. I owe you an apology. I should have noticed more. I'm sorry I didn't. The student didn't say much. Just nodded. But the moment meant everything. Elsewhere, the counselor posted a sign. Open listening sessions, every day this week. Anonymous stories welcome. And by the end of that day, the box beside it was full. In the library, a group of students began organizing something new. A student-led equity board. And when someone asked Amara if she wanted to lead it, she paused, then said, "No. I think we all lead it. Together." Because this wasn't about one girl anymore. This was about everyone finally being heard. The teacher who stayed behind. That evening, long after the school had emptied, one light still burned in a second-floor classroom. Mr. Daniels sat alone at his desk, flipping through a dusty file labeled, "Dismissed Complaints." Each form inside was stamped with a red "No action taken." He looked out the window, the courtyard now quiet, still carrying the weight of the day's transformation. He picked up a pen. And for the first time in years, started writing his own statement. "I knew. I didn't do enough. But I will now." He stayed late. Typed up a report. Attached student names. Dates. Instances. Proof. When he finished, he slid the file into an envelope marked, "To the new future of this school." Then he locked his classroom and walked out into the night with a weight finally lifted. Because silence had been the loudest crime of all. And he refused to carry it anymore. The story reaches the city. By the end of the week, the local news had turned national. Amara's story wasn't just a headline anymore, it was a movement. Talk shows discussed it. Podcasts broke it down. Social media lit up with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Amara. Hashtag Change Starts Here. Hashtag Not Just One Voice. People across the country shared their own school experiences. Some eerily similar. Some even worse. In a downtown newsroom, a producer pointed to Amara's picture. "We need her on air." But Amara wasn't chasing spotlights. She stayed at school, helping others share their stories. Her dad handled the interviews. He made one thing clear. "My daughter didn't do this to be famous. She did this because she couldn't stay quiet anymore." And now, neither could the rest of the country. From one school to another, emails began pouring in. From other students, other schools, other towns. One read, "I showed my principal your story. He said we should talk about race more, not less." Another said, "They told me I was too sensitive. But now, I know I'm not alone." Amara and her dad sat together at their kitchen table, reading each one. Stacks of letters. Screenshots. Drawings. Even poems. "You started something," her dad whispered. But Amara shook her head gently. "We all did." That weekend, she joined a panel of students from different districts. Not as a guest, but as a leader. "Let's build something," she said. "A network. A place where students don't need to be brave alone." And so, from the pain of one school, came the courage of many. Her story begins again. Graduation day. The gym was packed, rows of proud families, flashing cameras, decorated caps. Amara stood in line, gown flowing, nerves steady. When her name was called, the room rose. A standing ovation. Not because she had the highest grades, but because she had changed the story for everyone who came after her. She shook hands with the board official. "Thank you," the woman whispered, "for making us look in the mirror." Amara stepped down the stage, eyes scanning the crowd. Her father stood, clapping, tears in his eyes. Beside him, students from younger grades. Kids who now knew it was okay to speak up. As the ceremony ended, a reporter approached Amara one last time. "So, what's next for you?" She looked out over the crowd, at the banner above the gym. "The future speaks." Then she smiled. "Now, I help others find their voice." And just like that, Her story didn't end. It passed on.